My husband forced me to take a second job because he said I didn't deserve to be tired if I didn't earn anything. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I had always thought love meant support, but every day with Rhett chipped away at that belief. I spent mornings shelving books, afternoons tidying the house, and evenings staring at a pile of laundry that never seemed to shrink. When he said my work didn't count, I felt a sharp sting of invisibility. He demanded more, insisting I pick up a night shift at a diner, as if my exhaustion was something I could simply push aside. The diner lights flickered overhead as I balanced trays, forcing polite smiles while my body begged for rest. My hands ached, my head throbbed, and yet I kept going. At home, Rhett lounged, casually criticizing how I folded shirts or cooked meals, each comment a reminder that nothing I did was ever enough. Still, I said nothing. Quiet compliance had always seemed safer, easier than confronting the storm that brewed in his eyes. I reminded myself it was temporary, that I was doing this for us, even if us only existed in his imagination. Nights blurred into early mornings. The library and the diner became my constant companions, and exhaustion settled into my bones like an unwelcome shadow. Yet, in those long hours, I discovered something I hadn't anticipated, a stubborn thread of resolve. I began noticing the little injustices, the uneven balance between his comforts and my sacrifices. Each step I took between jobs felt heavy, yes, but it also carried a silent promise to myself that someday I would reclaim what had been quietly taken from me. The first weeks were the hardest. Every glance at him, every casual remark, felt like a blade hidden in everyday life. But even as my body weakened, my mind sharpened. I watched, I endured, and somewhere in that endless cycle of labor, a quiet ember of determination sparked. I knew I couldn't stay trapped in someone else's definition of worth, and although I didn't yet know how, I felt the first stirrings of a plan that would change everything. This was the life Rhett demanded, but it was also the moment I realized I wouldn't remain invisible forever. Rhett's words cut sharper than any exhaustion. "You don't know what tired really is," he sneered, leaning back as if my fatigue were some joke meant for his amusement. The hours at the library and diner blurred into one endless loop, but no matter how much I pushed myself, he found ways to belittle every effort. Bills piled up on the kitchen counter while he treated himself to dinners, gadgets, and outings that seemed to exist in a world where I didn't. I calculated every penny I earned from my night shifts, realizing my sacrifices were simply funding his indulgences. The imbalance gnawed at me, an invisible weight that no amount of sleep could erase. I started noticing the patterns, how he left his messes for me to clean, how he expected meals ready on demand, and how his criticism never stopped. It wasn't just fatigue, it was an unspoken assertion that my purpose was to serve him, a life drained of recognition or gratitude. A quiet resentment began to grow, subtle at first, like a shadow creeping across the walls of our home. I caught myself imagining freedom, moments where my choices mattered, and a life where my efforts didn't vanish into thin air. With each mocking remark, each selfish act, that seed strengthened, promising that the obedient version of me he demanded was no longer the version I could sustain. The harder I worked, the more I realized how deeply I had been underestimated, and the more I vowed that his sense of control would not remain unchallenged. That night at the diner felt different, though the fluorescent lights hummed their usual monotone. I carried trays of food with practiced ease, trying to ignore the fatigue clawing at my limbs. Then she approached, a confident woman with a polished look, sharp eyes, and a voice that carried a casual familiarity. "You've got a charming husband," she said lightly, almost as if we were old acquaintances. "Rhett brought me here a while back." Time froze. My chest tightened, and the tray in my hands wobbled. I forced a steady smile, swallowing the sudden rush of heat in my face. My fingers shook under the weight of the plates, but I held them firm, refusing to drop anything that could betray me. She laughed softly, unaware of the storm she had just unleashed, and I nodded politely, masking the churn of disbelief and hurt that threatened to spill over. Each word she had spoken etched itself into my mind, undeniable and piercing. Finishing the shift felt like walking through a haze. Every clatter of dishes, every murmur from other patrons blurred around me. The clarity of her statement cut through the fog. Rhett's lies, his late nights, his whispers, they were all real. He was not faithful, and now, the proof existed outside my imagination. I carried the revelation home like a weight in my chest, silent but searing. The betrayal I had suspected now had a face, and nothing could erase that truth. Rather than explode or beg for explanations, I became methodical. Confrontation would have been messy and reckless. I needed facts I couldn't argue away. So I started archiving everything. Screenshots of messages, copies of transfer notices, photographed glossy receipts folded into my palm like evidence. Each fragment I saved felt like inventory of his deceit and of the life he pretended we shared. I watched transactions with a new attention, tracing nights when my extra income disappeared from our joint account and reappeared as meals, flowers, reservations. The pattern was crystalline. Money I had bled for was buying someone else attention and favor. It stung in a different way than the late-night whispering. This was tangible theft, framed as his entitlement. When the texts arrived, casual and coy, I learned to breathe through the nausea and catalog them. I copied dates and times into a small notebook, then added context. Where he said he was, how he said it, the little lies that now looked like stitches in a larger seam. Receipts with unfamiliar restaurant names and digital confirmations of rides compiled into a timeline that mocked every excuse he had offered. I also made practical plans. I opened a discreet savings account under my maiden name and scheduled automatic deposits from both paychecks. It felt like reclaiming currency of autonomy. I messaged a friend from college who tolerated no nonsense and asked for temporary space if needed. I reached out to a housing resource line and listened while someone explained tenant rights and emergency shelters. The information felt oddly empowering rather than frightening. At home, I resumed my role with precision. I folded shirts, brewed coffee, and smiled in the way that made him comfortable. To the neighbors, our life remained ordinary. Inside, though, my resolve had tightened. Each chore completed became a quiet affirmation that I could manage without his patronage. I stopped volunteering explanations for late nights and let the questions hang, unanswered, until his curiosity soured. The colder part of my plan involved timing. I wanted him to feel secure before the reveal. Hubris is an accomplice in humiliation. I waited until I had enough documentation to present a narrative immune to plausible deniability. Bank records showing transfers the same nights he claimed over time, messages coordinating meetups, receipts itemizing dinners and hotel stays. I printed copies, labeled folders, and placed a sealed envelope in my drawer containing scene-by-scene notes. Anger had altered my shape. It no longer burned in jagged flares, but moved with the quiet efficiency of tools assembled for a purpose. Revenge, I decided, would not look like spectacle for spectacle's sake. It would be meticulous, undeniable, and final. When the time came, it would leave no room for his favorite defense, plausible ignorance. I practiced telling the story aloud alone, calibrating the cadence so witnesses would hear clarity instead of chaos. My voice needed to deliver facts, not fury, to convert sympathy into consequence. Preparation felt like armor. It steadied my hand and resolve. I started moving my earnings away from sight, slipping cash and transfers into an account Rhett didn't know existed. Every deposit felt like reclaiming fragments of myself he had taken for granted. I no longer worried about his whims. My focus shifted to building options outside the walls of our apartment. At the diner, I quietly forged friendships with coworkers who offered advice and shared experiences about independence and self-sufficiency. At the library, I exchanged smiles and small confidences with colleagues who mentioned available apartments and affordable rooms. Each connection became a thread I could rely on if the day came when I walked away. Back at home, I resumed my role as the dutiful wife. I cooked meals, organized closets, and maintained a veneer of exhaustion that justified every sigh and late return. Rhett, seeing me bend under the weight he imagined, relaxed into arrogance. His insults became sharper, his demands louder, and his sense of entitlement more blatant. Yet behind the mask, I was alert and deliberate. I memorized his routines, noted the gaps in his schedule, and planned each step of my exit with precision. The home he thought he dominated became my stage, where I performed compliance while silently orchestrating my freedom. His confidence swelled, blind to the truth. The more he assumed he controlled me, the closer I edged toward complete independence. Every disrespectful comment, every careless smirk, strengthened my resolve. I learned to wield patience as a weapon, turning his arrogance into an unwitting ally in my careful strategy. The more he pressed, the more I gathered resources, knowledge, and momentum, ensuring that when the moment came, the tables would turn entirely, and I would leave unbroken but fully in control. That evening, the apartment felt heavier than usual, the air thick with tension. Rhett's voice cut through the quiet, sharp and accusing. "What do you even contribute here?" His words carried the weight of every careless remark, every belittling comment, every night I had spent exhausted and unseen. I didn't flinch. No tears welled, no words escaped. Instead, I studied him calmly, letting the sting of his contempt settle into a cold, focused clarity. Every sneer, every pointed gesture, became a mirror reflecting his arrogance and entitlement. For the first time, I saw the truth in full. There was nothing left to salvage. The excuses, the apologies I had imagined he might offer, the fleeting hope that love could survive, none of it existed. My patience, my endurance, my silent resilience had been mistaken for weakness, and I would no longer allow him that illusion. I moved slowly around the apartment, straightening cushions and placing his untouched shirts aside, my motions deliberate and measured. In that quiet routine, I made an unspoken declaration to myself. The life I had been living under his control was ending tonight. The anger that had simmered beneath the surface for weeks crystallized into resolve. Every misstep, every insult, every betrayal had led to this moment. I didn't argue, I didn't plead. I simply decided. The marriage was over. I felt a strange weight lift as I stood there, silent and unshaken. In that stillness, the first seeds of freedom took root. The future, once uncertain and constrained, now stretched before me with possibility. Tonight marked not an ending of hope, but the beginning of reclaiming a life that was wholly my own. The night was set with careful precision. I called the diner manager, claiming I wanted to organize a small surprise for some regular customers, and quietly arranged for Rhett and Maris to be invited without either suspecting the other. Every detail was planned, the timing, the seating, even the moment I would step into the light. As they arrived, smug smiles in place, they expected a casual evening. Rhett leaned back in his chair, confident, while Maris chatted animatedly, oblivious to what was about to unfold. I waited behind the counter, steadying my nerves, each second stretching with anticipation. Then I stepped forward in my uniform, carrying a folder of evidence. The diner's hum quieted as I approached, drawing attention naturally, a presence neither of them could ignore. Patrons glanced up, sensing the sudden tension, while I opened the folder and laid out proof. Receipts detailing dinners he had paid for with my wages, photographs capturing clandestine outings, and printouts of messages between the two of them. I spoke clearly, my voice measured, letting every word land with the weight of undeniable truth. Maris's eyes widened, her casual confidence crumbling, while Rhett's smirk faltered as he realized the facade had shattered. The evidence was irrefutable. No excuse could bridge the gulf between his words and actions. Whispers spread through the diner. Patrons leaned forward, recognizing names and details that corroborated my claims. The space that once felt ordinary now felt charged with justice, with the full impact of his deception displayed for all to see. I closed the folder, letting the finality of the reveal settle. Rhett stammered, trying to defend himself, but the weight of proof and the witness's eyes left him powerless. I turned to leave, the hum of quiet murmurs following me, each step affirming the control I had regained. That night, the trap worked flawlessly. His arrogance had led him right into my hands, and the truth stood exposed in the open. Rhett's face twisted as he scrambled for words, attempting to rewrite the story in his favor, but the shock had stripped him of credibility. Maris, red-faced and flustered, gathered her things and exited without a word, her pride battered by the exposure. Around us, the diner erupted, not in chaos, but in judgment. Familiar faces nodded at me, murmuring support, some openly shaking their heads at him. Conversations halted mid-bite as patrons whispered what they had suspected, reinforcing the reality he tried to deny. Every glance he received reflected disdain, a social mirror to the consequences of his betrayal. I remained composed, moving with deliberate calm toward the exit. The folder of proof had served its purpose. My mission was complete. Outside, Rhett's voice chased me across the asphalt, a mix of anger and disbelief, but I didn't flinch. My strides were steady, each step carrying the weight of my independence. The cool night air hit my face as I passed the parking lot, bags already slung over my shoulder. Each motion felt like reclamation, a physical assertion that the chapter he thought he controlled had ended. I didn't look back, though the sound of his shouts lingered faintly, impotent against the clarity of my choice. For the first time in years, I felt unbound. The home that had confined me, the expectations that had weighed me down, and the man who had underestimated me. All were left behind. That night marked the definitive severing, the point of no return. I moved forward alone but resolute, free from the life that had tried to dictate my worth. The next morning, I walked into the courthouse carrying the evidence I had meticulously gathered. Texts, receipts, photographs, all catalogued, all irrefutable. As I presented the documentation, I watched the judge's attention sharpen. The story of my years of endurance finally laid bare in an official setting. Rhett's attempts to explain or deflect fell flat. Every misused dollar, every clandestine meeting, every lie he had spun came forward as proof of his betrayal. The court saw clearly what I had long known. My labor had been exploited to fund his selfish pursuits. When the verdict arrived, relief washed over me. Financial compensation was granted, not just as reparation, but as acknowledgement of the life he had tried to claim over me. The papers felt heavy with justice, but in that weight, I found liberation. I moved into a small apartment, carefully chosen and warmly lit, a space entirely my own. For the first time in years, silence accompanied me at night without tension pressing down, and I slept deeply, letting exhaustion dissolve into rest rather than anxiety. Sitting by the window with morning sunlight spilling across the floor, I reflected on the path that had brought me here. There was no sorrow in the realization that I had lost a husband, only clarity, strength, and the quiet satisfaction of reclaiming my autonomy. The life I had reconstructed, painstakingly and patiently, belonged entirely to me. Freedom was no longer an idea. It was the air I breathed, steady and unbound. Do you think I did the right thing by leaving Rhett and taking back my life? Or should I have given him another chance? I'm really curious about your thoughts. Share in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more.